Hi, welcome back. So I posted a little funny MoC video yesterday, and I'm actually a little surprised, but also not really, about the types of comments I've been getting. A lot of people seem to be complaining about the difficulty and hyperspecificity of the new MoC, and I have to agree. All the comments complaining aren't complaining about nothing. I was gonna make a video about the best teams to clear this MoC, as I usually do with endgame content. I had the script recorded, the thumbnail created, and everything ready, but then looking back at it, that's really only a very small number of teams that most players could efficiently clear this MoC cycle with, disregarding any hyper-invested face shout teams with E1 Robin or Boot Hill with E1 Rame and E1 Fugue. For most people who have been horizontally investing into their account, as in they have 3 or 4 teams, old or new, that they use whenever they need to, which is what most F2P players do, clearing this MoC is kind of an impossible task, or at the very least a very hard one. So, in this video, I want to talk about how endgame content should have challenging variety and not boring marketing, and how this MoC fails at that miserably. Before we start though, you should like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, because not many of you are actually subscribed. You should also join the Express Train Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with. Now let's get on to it. The idea I want to present to you when it comes to this topic is that when we as players go to try out the new endgame content, what we're looking for is challenging variety and not boring marketing. Sure, it kinda seems impossible as a gacha game, especially when it's Star Rail, to not market the endgame content towards the new character, but HSR does it without even trying to hide it, to the point where you have to be really careful about the showcases that you see when the character is out, because both the enemies and the cycle buffs are heavily catered to give the newest characters as easy of a fight as possible. The cycle buff right now is one that gives every character 20% energy every time a cycle passes, and allows any memo sprite to act one extra time after they first act during that cycle. Basically gives Aglaia an insane amount of extra damage and energy, and also gives Herta way more inspiration stacks to be able to do her skill more. While this isn't too bad on the surface, you gotta remember that Aglaia is the only Remembrance DPS we have right now, and the other Remembrance character, the Trailblazer, doesn't really benefit much from Mem doing the Aura an extra time, so it's really only useful for Aglaia and Herta. Now let's get on to the problem that people are facing with this new MoC. Then let's continue talking about what I mean by challenging variety versus boring marketing. The problem with this MoC is that Herta and Aglaia are chilled super hard, of course. However, the energy buff is pretty universal, aside from characters like Acheron and Fei Xiao, who even then still get benefits from it through their allies. However, when it comes to energy-based ultimates, nobody gets as much benefit as Aglaia and Herta do, which means they're insanely overpowered here. Now, that wouldn't be so much of a problem if you could use a diverse cast of characters to clear, like you could with the past MoC. In my opinion, by the way, the past MoC was definitely one of the best. The cast of characters you could use is pretty huge. In the first half you could use any lightning, wind, or fire character, and they would do exceptionally well, especially if they're AoE. And in the second half you could use any ice, imaginary, or quantum character. They'd also do exceptionally well. Even physical characters like Yunli and Boot Hill do very well in that MoC. I've even seen a Zila Zero cycle using Remembrance MC and 4-star supports Tingyun and Pella only, but of course the builds are pretty unrelatable. Still an insane feat though, and for an MoC 12 in this economy, it's pretty impressive for Zila to be able to even clear the level in under 10 cycles. I don't think there was any DPS choice that was bad in the past MoC, however, in this current MoC, if you don't have either Herta or Aglaia, you're pretty f***ed. Now, some people are going to come and say, well, I used so-and-so and I cleared very easily, all of you have skill issues. However, the anecdote of one person shouldn't invalidate the anecdote of 100 others. Because out of the, as of now, 137 comments, at least 100 are complaining about this MoC. Just because you cleared with a certain high investment team that isn't Herta or Aglaia doesn't mean this MoC isn't badly designed. You're kinda just invalidating another person's feelings in order to feel superior, and I will prove that this MoC is badly designed, and especially compared to a couple previous ones. Now, I've seen some people complain about this past MoC with the Trotters, but it has a pretty specific gimmick. And as long as you take advantage of this gimmick, it's one of the best MoCs ever, and also one of the most fun. You can clear the first half with Fei Xiao, Acheron, DOT, Jing Yuan, Firefly, Boot Hill, and even Blade, and all of these teams are genuinely viable, even without insanely high investment, especially because you can take advantage of the Trotters. You can clear the second half with just about anything as well, from Jingliu to Honkai to Qingchui and Zila, as well as many other teams as well. Even with his insanely high HP, the Trotter gimmick was able to help all units deal a decent amount of damage to be able to clear easily, even with the insane 2.3 million HP on Svarog and 2-phase 1.6 million HP on the Bug. As I said, even an F2P Zila team with high invested relics zero-cycled it. Try doing that in this MoC on either side with anything less than E6 Zila with E6 Sunday. Now this of course comes down to, again, the lovely Trotter gimmick, but also how varied enemy weaknesses and numbers are. Both sides can be fought with both single target and AoE characters in the last MoC, and they have completely different recommended elements as well. Meanwhile, this MoC shares Ice as a recommended element between both sides, as well as old units not being as viable as the last rotation because Trotters aren't available. It's also way more AoE focused than single target. Normal Fei Xiao and Boot Hill teams are crying in the corner, and for any F2P team for both units, you're not clearing much faster than 5 or 6 cycles. There's also the issue of both sides sharing fastest clearing teams as well. Herda and Rappa are both insane on both sides, and nothing really comes close to either of them on either side, aside from Aglaia and Acheron on the second side. Jingliu, Danhangayel, DOT, Zila, Blade, hell, even Jing Yuan, because the Memo Sprite buff doesn't count for him, and even Fei Xiao, as we mentioned, are not going to be as viable as they ever were, and especially when, again, it comes to the last MoC rotation. And even if you could clear, I bet most of these old units are clearing a lot slower compared to before. Whether it's the past MoC or an MoC before that, and that doesn't really feel nice either. Now the biggest problem here is Fei Xiao not being anywhere near as viable as she once were. She's of course relatively weak in this MoC because it's barely single target and has 0 wind weakness. But for a player, whether they're veteran or new, who pulled Fei Xiao and her best teams expecting her to carry them at least a few patches, will be incredibly disappointed to see that only 3 patches later, their Fei Xiao, who was harbored as the new best DPS character during these 3 patches, is almost completely useless, especially when compared to the new units that are getting glazed by the cycle buffs and bosses. This is also true for basically anyone who pulled Jingliu, Danhangayel, and any other DPS they thought would carry them a while, but Fei Xiao is the newest and also most extreme example, so we'll use her for now. The fact that she's so bad in this MoC is pretty ridiculous. Now the obvious reason they do this is because they want to market their new units as much as possible. However, by doing that, they either don't realize or they don't care that they're alienating the player base that either can't or doesn't want to pull for that new unit. What they need to get is that not every player is going to pull for the new unit, especially when they're releasing 2 5-stars every patch ever since the game has come out, besides 2.6 with Rappa, and also not releasing any 4-star units to compensate. However, those players that don't want to get every single new unit also have the right to be able to clear if their accounts are strong enough. Someone who got Fei Xiao and really likes playing as her is going to feel pretty cheated when they realize she doesn't do much in the current MoC, and in turn feel forced to pull for the new unit, which is never a good thing to have your players feel. What we want out of Endgame is a challenge you log in to defeat after you've completed everything else in the game that you're required to do, like this story and whatever else, especially after your account has a bunch of strong characters. When those characters that were insanely powerful in the last MoC cycles are now pretty pathetic compared to what they were, it doesn't feel particularly good. Now this may be a problem with Fei Xiao specifically because she's single target, but the problem is that they really marketed both the MoC and Apocalyptic Shadow for her when she came out, so people who felt forced to get her then are again facing the same feeling. Acheron got weaker when Fei Xiao and Firefly started getting shelled very hard, which also left Acheron players feeling like shit if they don't have Jiaoqiu. And the same thing happened with Jingliu, Blade, and so on and so forth. Now, for sure, we know older units are going to get buffed eventually, but there are a couple problems with this. One I'm going to speak about in a future video when I have more confirmation about Annexa and Casteresis kits, which is that old character buffs are just band-aid solutions that may not last very long if we get more unbalanced kits. But as I said, that's a topic for another day. The other problem is that a character like Fei Xiao isn't going to get buffed anytime soon, because she's a new character that is still insanely powerful when she is powerful. However, with the way they create their endgame content, she's either not going to be powerful again for a very long time, or at least until another Wind or Hunt unit comes out, and even then, the next Hunt unit might just power creep Fei Xiao herself instead. So again, just like every time it happened before, players who got her feel cheated. When you pull a new DPS unit, you want them to be viable for a time long enough to where it feels like what you've invested in them is worth it. What you want to experience with your units, whether they're your favorite because you're parasocial and want to marry them, or they're your favorites because you like their kit, is to fight a bunch of shit with them and win. When the endgame content that the game provides doesn't let you do that, there's really nothing else for you to do at that point. You just have to sit there and either wait for them to get a rotation that suits them, or just accept that you have to keep pulling the new unit over and over and over again. And again, that really doesn't feel particularly good. Finally, I still have fixes to suggest for this problem. Number 1 is that they cease marketing endgame content towards the new characters so heavily. I'm not asking them to completely stop, because that would be both counterproductive and impossible for them to do because they like money. It would be counterproductive because then players who got the new unit would instead have nowhere to use it. That just do it to a lesser degree, using variety. It goes back to the main idea of this video, which is challenging variety over boring marketing. The 2.7 Apocalyptic Shadow and 2.7 MoC are both perfect examples of challenging variety over boring marketing. As we mentioned with the MoC, you could use basically anything with decent enough investment and you can clear it very easily. With the 2.7 Apocalyptic Shadow, while Kukolia is honestly a very regrettable boss, it's only because she has an insane amount of crowd control, and if you have a counter against that, you'll be fine. The second half Banana Academics boss is genuinely one of the best in the game. It has a clear gimmick and objective that is both clear and requires thinking, and a variety of elemental weaknesses that lets you use many different characters without having to use something like Robin Z1 to negate some of the elemental resistance. The 2.7 Apocalyptic Shadow has every single elemental type in the game divided between both bosses besides physical, and the 2.7 MoC does as well. However, when it comes to physical, Boothill and Yunli are basically the only important characters, and while Yunli does kinda struggle, Boothill was still absolutely insane in both the 2.7 MoC and Apocalyptic Shadow. You could use so many teams in both modes, and it was honestly probably the most fun I've had playing Star Rail, especially because I got Fugue too. It's nothing compared to what the 3.0 MoC and Apocalyptic Shadow are, and that's definitely a damn shame. Why they don't do it again is beyond me, so simply do what the 2.7 MoC and APS did by introducing bosses that are still challenging. Now, I'm not asking them to make endgame content easy, but to simply be able to be effectively beaten with many different units, old or new. Instead of the bug boss in the first half that they already had in the previous MoC in the second half, they could have put something like Kafka, which would have introduced 3 different elements that aren't currently recommended, or an MoC version of the Dormancy boss, which they still haven't done, which would have also introduced 3 different elements that aren't currently recommended in the current version. Even though the Kafka boss is generally pretty hated because of her crowd control, she still would have been a much better pick than a boss that was both in a previous MoC and shares 2 of the best in slot teams with the second half boss anyway. I think what they were trying to do with this MoC is shield both Herta and Aglaia at the same time, with Aglaia shielded by the Nikador boss and Herta shielded by the Bug boss because, again, they're somehow expecting, or at the very least asking for, players to get both units, which is just impossible for basically anyone except whales or people who have been saving up for a very long time. Or you know, they could have shielded both of them in one boss, which is the Nikador boss, because it shields both of them pretty hard. So again, an MoC version of Dormancy or a Kafka boss would have been much better instead of the Bug, so I really wish they did that instead. The second fix I have for this issue is simply more endgame modes and more endgame levels with a 3rd team slot. Now, I believe this one is more plausible because it goes hand in hand with marketing, while the first one provides a balanced experience, which they'll never do a balanced experience, they're Honkai Star Rail. A 3rd team slot is pretty predatory when it comes to new players, however, after you've been playing for like 4 months, you probably have 3 pretty well established teams. Although I really hope they don't do this before they make more viable 4-star units, because right now, we definitely don't have enough 4-star units for a 3rd team slot option. More endgame modes is just simply better for everyone, and if we could get more specific endgame modes that are specific towards certain niches, then it would do several different things that I believe are positive for the game, but the main thing is that it forces them to create niches that weren't previously created, or at the very least expand upon them, which means that at least for a little while, they maybe won't keep creating the next best DPS unit when designing a DPS unit. It would also keep these niches alive for at least a while in this new hypothetical endgame mode. So final message, what we want from endgame content isn't boring marketing, what we want is challenging variety, where you could use the team you've invested so long in whenever you want to use them, and you can generally have a fun time with them. We don't want to keep stressing over getting the new unit over and over and over again. Someone who already has Jingliu genuinely shouldn't have to also get Herta because she's so much better. But we're past that hopefully. If the old character buffs do something significant, then that won't be a problem. But it will become a problem again if the dev team also don't start balancing new units, which is a topic for a future video. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. This video is a a little bit longer than usual, but if you reached this point, I very much appreciate you staying. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future. Join the Express Run Discord server for a lovely community to hang out with. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.